In this video, we're going to look at Fusion 360. If you've used things like Blender or SketchUp, you'll be used to some of the things that you'll see in this video. But I have to warn you, it's quite a different software to use if you've never used 3D software before. Now, before we get started, Fusion 360 is 100% free as long as you're using it as a hobby or if you're using it at school. If you happen to work for a company that earns money from making 3D models, you have to pay for it. With that said, let's just very quickly go through what we can see on the screen right now. In the screen, you can see that we have a place where our models will go. To rotate and to zoom in, you use the middle button on your mouse, the scroll wheel. If you, for example, click that scroll wheel and move your mouse around, you can move around the 3D world just like this, up, down, left and right. If you click on the scroll wheel, press Shift on your keyboard, you can move your mouse around and now rotate around the world. In the top right corner, you'll see a little cube. It has names of the sides that you can look at. So if you want to look at the left-hand side of your model, or the front of your model, or the top of your model, you can click on these arrows. You can also just grab this cube and rotate it around like a joystick. On the top, you can also see that you have these two arrows which just rotate the entire platform like this. So you have to kind of get used to moving around using this, or my preferred method, using your mouse just to have a look at the world and what you're doing. We're going to start modeling with a really simple cube, which is about the simplest thing you can model in 3D. So let's get going. To make any kind of model, you always have to start with a sketch. So we're going to click on Sketch and create Sketch. Now, Fusion 360 will ask you which direction are you sketching in. What that means is, are you sketching from the top or the left or the front? In this case, I want to sketch as if I'm looking down on my model from the top. So I'm going to go right over here where I can see the floor. I'm going to click on my mouse and you can see up in the top right, I'm looking at the top. I'm going to just scroll my way so that I can see a little bit better. You can also see some measurements on the floor of this model. And those are in millimeters, so you can see I've got 25, 50, 75, and those are millimeters, so 2.5 centimeters, 5 centimeters, and so on. I'm now going to go up where it says Sketch, go to Rectangle, and choose Center Rectangle. I'm going to go to the center of the floor there, and I'm going to drag out a 50 by 50 square. Now I can spend some time just trying to get it right like this, or I can simply type 50 on my keyboard and using the tab button, press 50 over there as well. I can of course choose any measurement I want to, and sometimes I find this a lot easier than trying to drag the correct size. Once we're done with that, I'm going to press Enter on my keyboard. As you can see, the square has changed color, and that means I can't draw anymore. I've just kind of fixed it in that size. Now, if at this moment I think, well, I actually needed it bigger, I can go to these numbers over here, the 50 and the 50, double click them, and in fact make them bigger just by doing that. So that's a really easy way of changing the measurements once you've drawn something. And you can see now that I've got this square and it's on the floor, and I now want to make it into a cube. Well, I don't actually want to make a cube, I just want to make it into a box of some kind. And in this case, I'm going to go to Create, and I want to extrude. Now, extrude in English means to pull a shape out of something, or to make a shape out of something. I also like using the keyboard shortcuts, which is E over here. So I'm going to press E on my keyboard, click on the square. You can see this arrows here telling me that I can pull this square into a cube. And if I was to do that, you can see, again, I've got those millimeters on the side. And I'm going to make a 30 millimeter box there. I'm going to press Enter on my keyboard, and I'll just move around a little bit so you can see this cube now. Now you can see it's a simple cube. Now what makes Fusion different from other programs such as Blender is if later on somebody comes up to you and says, you should have made that cube a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. Now normally in those programs, it's a real hassle to have to delete everything and start again. In Fusion, I want us to look at this bottom bar over here. Now what this does is it records every step that we make in a model. Now rather than just being an undo system like we have in Photoshop, what we can do is we can click on something that we did, and you can see my very first thing I did was when I started a sketch. When I click on it, you can see Now underneath that cube is that first square that I drew. I'm going to go into this sketch over here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to edit. It will then open up the sketch as if I'm starting the model again. Now in this case, I'm just going to go and change 50 to 60. I'm going to now go and stop this sketch, and you can see that my cube is now a cuboid, because it's a 60 by 50 cuboid, but it still is extruded up to that 30 millimeters that I did. And this is the really cool thing about Fusion. We can go back into our models, change one or two details, but not ruin the model. So what else can we do while we're here? Why don't we take the top part of our cube, go to sketch, and this time draw a circle in there. I want to draw a center diameter circle, which means I want to start the circle in its own center. I'm going to go to the center there, click, and let's make this a 30 millimeter circle. Press enter on my keyboard twice, and you can see that I have a circle there. Now what I can do next is click on that circle again, using the keyboard shortcut of E. I can now pull up to make a new shape, or I can take that arrow and push it down into the box to make a hole. Let's press OK to that. And there we have a box with a hole inside it, which is not really an amazing model, but just those two actions should be enough to start modeling something quite cool. Now let's do something else. Let's take one of the sides, go to sketch, take a rectangle and do a 2-point rectangle here. I'm just going to go to a random place and just drag a rectangle like that. What you can now see is if I press enter, you can see that rectangle's there. Again, if I press E, I can go out or in using this rectangle. If we were to go in like this and press OK, you can see that our holes have now joined together, which is kind of useful if you're making a complicated shape. I'm just going to press undo to that. I'm going to click on that inner rectangle, press E on my keyboard for extrude, and just extrude out like this, and press OK. Now one thing you may have noticed on the side is a little menu system here. We have something called the origin, which has a light bulb which is switched off. If I switch it on, you can see that the origin is basically our axes that we started with. I'll switch them off because they do get in the way. You can see that I have this section called bodies, and at this moment my model only has one body in it, which is this big thing over here. If I was to click on the light bulb, I can hide that whole thing as well. Now later on, when you make really complicated models, you might end up with multiple bodies in there, and sometimes it's necessary to switch one or two off so that you can see what you're doing, because it can get messy. And then the sketches, you can see I've got 3 sketches. Those should be the sketch I started with, which is the rectangle. The second sketch was the circle that I drew to make a hole, and the third one was the rectangle that I made to make this little sticky out thing over here. So I'm just going to collapse that for a second. Let's do something slightly different. Let's go to our top view over here, and I'm going to make another sketch, and this time I'm going to make a center rectangle, but I'm going to go out a little bit over here. Let me just turn that around the way it was. So I'm just going to make a rectangle here like so, like that. Don't really care how big it is. I'm going to extrude it with E like this, and I'm going to make it about 1 centimeter like that. Press OK to there. Now what's happened is, if you can see that I now have a second body. Now the reason that there's a second body is because I made this rectangle and cube away from the first body. It's not touching it, it's separate. Therefore, it's a separate body. Now what we'll do is, we'll just click on that view over there. I'm going to go to my second cube, right click it, and press move. Over here where it says move object, I'm going to choose bodies. I'm going to go there and choose the body itself. I'm going to move it up a little bit, and I'm going to move it in to the original one. Now if I press OK to that, you can see once I scroll around it, it is there. Now something to note, it is still a separate body from the first shape. Just because I moved it in to the first body, it doesn't make it part of that body. I'm going to click on the shape over here. I'm going to go to modify, and I'm going to press combine. Now what's going to happen is I have a range of choices. I can take my first body, which is this one over here. I can then take the second body I drew, which is this one over here, and I can choose to join them. Now if I was to join them, they become one shape, and you can see on the left here, my body 2 has disappeared because it's now joined with body 1. I'm going to undo that for a second. I'm again going to go to Modify and Combine. I'm going to choose that first target body as my first big shape. I'm going to choose the second cube, the smaller one, as the tool body. And in this case, I am going to cut it. And you can see it's gone red. And what Fusion is doing is saying, well, you're about to cut that shape out of that big shape over there. If I press OK, you can see I've now made a hole in the original body. Now if I show you the third choice, again I'm going to go to Modify, Combine, make sure that target body is the big one, choose the small body for the tool body, and this time I'm going to choose an Intersect. An Intersect basically means remove everything apart from where the two shapes are touching. If I was to press OK, it's kind of a disappointing result. Really nothing is left. Now this can be really useful when you have to cut complicated shapes out of each other. In this case, we've just got body 2 over here. I'm going to click on there like that, right click and press delete. And we can just get rid of that body altogether like that. Now, this is not really a practical model of anything. I haven't really modeled anything here, apart from just simple shapes. What I would like to do to finish off this video is show some of the finishing things that you can do to a shape in Fusion 360. Now, for example, I have this hole over here. Let's say if we were really making this model with a machine like a 3D printer. Now, it would be kind of nice to have some soft edges, because that would be nice for a user to hold in their hands and it wouldn't cut them and it wouldn't be sharp or anything like that. So let's choose this round edge over here for a start. And we have two choices of how to make an edge not so sharp. If we go to the Modify, we have a fillet and a chamfer. Now, this would be a good time to mention the letter S on your keyboard, which I love using because I hate taking my mouse to menus all the time. So if I press S on my keyboard and just type the first few letters of something that I know I want to do, Fusion will actually bring that up for me to just click so that I don't have to go to the menu. So let's do a chamfer. It's asking which edge would you like to chamfer. I'm going to choose that round circle there. And then in the chamfer, I'm going to put a 5mm chamfer. And you can see what happens. It takes the edge, which is square, and literally carves the corner out of it, which is quite cool. That's really useful sometimes. And you can see the effect is immediate there. Now, in this case, I actually don't need a chamfer because that's not what I wanted. So I'm going to press S on my keyboard and type in fillet. I'm not going to do the first one, but the second one. Again, it's going to ask me which edge, and I'm going to say this one. Now, in this case, I've got an arrow, so I can actually pull and push until it's exactly where I want it to be. Now, for this one, I'm going to do a 3mm fillet, press OK, and you can see immediately that that hole is nice and round rather than a sharp edge. I can also do the same for all the other edges, like this. So I've just pressed Shift on my keyboard. With my mouse, I'm going through and just clicking all the edges that I can. I'm going to rotate around and choose the last of the edges here, like this. And also, I'm going to choose the inside edges as well as the outside edges. Now, it does take a while. Like this, and that's the last edge there. I'm going to press S, fillet here. And this time I'm going to again do a 3mm fillet. You can see that my shape has changed completely. So rather than looking like a 3D model, it's starting to look like an actual physical object. I'll press OK to that. And that is your very quick introduction into some of the menus, some of the ways of drawing shapes, cutting shapes and joining them, and also finishing your shapes so that they look a little bit nicer.